freedom, pass from hand to yearning hand, and the vision of our fathers spread hope throughout this land, as the dream some fought and died for in my heart becomes my own. I will strive to keep her promise, America, my home. America, America, may God bless America, and freedom reign across America, my home. From the shorelines to the prairies, to the cities great and small, we have reaped the fruits of justice and liberty for all. So with deep appreciation for the blessings of freedom that we know in this great and wonderful land of ours, I'm Dr. George Simon, welcoming you to another edition of Character Matters. This is the program where we talk about what I consider to be the defining issue of our time, the character crisis that we face, and the impact that it has on all of us in every facet of our lives. And if you want to be part of the discussion tonight, feel free to give us a call at 718-717-8296. That's 718-717-8296. That's the number to call if you want to join the conversation about character and character matters. And as I said before, I'm Dr. George Simon. I am a psychologist, semi-retired, mostly retired, although I will be doing some professional workshops once again this coming year, and I'll have information for you about that to tell you at some later point this year in advance of the cities that I'll be going to. I'll give you an idea, and I'll also be posting that information on my website and on my blog. On my website at drgeorgesimon.com. That's drgeorgesimon.com. And then my blog, manipulative-people.com. That's www.manipulative-people.com. And I also write for a blog based in the UK titled Psychology, Philosophy, and Real Life at www.counselingwith2lsresource.com. That's counselingwith2lsresource.com. And as most of you already know, I also have an internationally best-selling book in sheep's clothing, Understanding and Dealing with Manipulative People, regarded by many as the definitive book on the subject of manipulators and their ilk, and what you can do to deal with the tactics you're likely to encounter, and how to respond to them, and how to empower yourself in relationships with individuals of that kind. And then my book, Character Disturbance, The Phenomenon of Our Age, which is an in-depth look at all of the disturbed characters out there, and that's part of what we're going to be talking about tonight, the vast spectrum of character disturbance, what it is, what it's all about. You know, these days there are so many books out there that have most folks thinking that everyone is a narcissist or a sociopath or a psychopath. Been a lot of popular books out there, and These books detail many of the core characteristics of these kinds of severely disturbed personalities, and folks always think that they find either their mate or their relationship partner or somebody else they know, somebody they work with, somebody they grew up with in these examples, and then they figure that they're dealing with somebody with one of these severe personality disturbances. But the point of character disturbance, and the reason I wrote it, is that we live in an age where character disturbance of some degree, and that's what we'll be talking about tonight, character disturbance of some degree is far more prevalent than it ever was. And for that reason, we have a number of folks who may not qualify, in fact, for a diagnosis of a severe personality or character disorder, but may still be sufficiently character impaired or character disturbed to cause you a whole lot of trouble in your life. So that's why I wrote Character Disturbance, to give folks a good idea of the vast spectrum of character disturbance, all the kinds of nefarious folks you're likely to meet out there, what kinds of behaviors to expect from them, and what you can do about it, how you can empower yourself. I especially explain how these folks tend to think and how that twisted thinking of theirs impacts their behavior. I also help you spot the behaviors that they exhibit somewhat habitually that really impairs their interpersonal relations and that you can deal with more directly and more effectively. And most importantly, I explain what you need to look for in the way of getting help, because by far more people ask me that question than any other questions. Of the hundreds of emails and other inquiries I get every single month, everyone wants to know pretty much the same thing. They tell the same story. They tried several times to get help in therapy, and they got no help. As a matter of fact, sometimes things even got worse, and they didn't understand it. They didn't know why. They were trying to make sense of the mess that their life had become when they hooked up with a disturbed or impaired character or disordered character. So in character disturbance, I explain what it is you really need to look for in the way of the right kind of services that will get you the help that you need. I also have many articles that can help you with this topic on my blog site at manipulative-people.com. And then lastly, there's my book for the Christian faith community, The Judas Syndrome, about how genuine faith, not lip service, not saying the magic words, not making these testimonials and professions that we have all heard so many times, but actually embracing and taking to heart and living out, most especially living out, the faith can really change a life. So that is the Judas Syndrome for all of you interested. And I invite you to go to Amazon.com or to your local bookstore. Easier to download at Amazon or to order the in-print book. A lot of folks these days still prefer a carry-around book, and I'm one of those folks. I like to have something in my hand, something I can read, something I can take with me, and I don't have to worry about my digital device being handy. It is nice to have that convenience, but I still prefer the option, at least, of having a book in hand, a real book. And In Sheep's Clothing and Character Disturbance and the Judas Syndrome are all available both in trade paperback as well as Character Disturbance is available in hardcover too, as well as digital downloads and audiobook as well. audiobook through, now I'm blocking on Tantor Audio. There you go. So avail yourself of those, avail yourselves of the articles, and you'll gain some insight into how to deal with the most difficult people in your life. If you want to join the conversation, once again, the number to call is 718-717-8296. You don't have to have a question to ask per se. Maybe you just have a story you'd like to share. Maybe there's something you've read either on in one of my articles online or in the book that you have a question about, or maybe you want me to expand upon. Maybe you even tried out some of the things that I advocate, some of the principles that I put forward in my books and articles. Maybe you've tried them out. Maybe you've even taken some of the leads that I've given as far as what to look for in the way of helpful services when you go looking for help. And if you do, and if you want to share that with us, happy to take your call at 718-717-8296. Well, this has been another interesting week. I tell you, it was a very refreshing. It was a very refreshing moment in my professional training when I was witnessing the birthing of a whole new paradigm that has come to be known in our field, in the mental health field, as the cognitive behavioral paradigm. And let me just explain this in some very simplistic but easy to understand terms. Basically, the paradigm is this: how we think influences both how we feel and how we act, and vice versa. There is an inextricable connection between our thoughts, our attitudes, our feelings, and our behavior. They are interconnected. And, if a person harbors certain beliefs, let us say that some guy harbors certain beliefs about both the value of and the place of women in the home. Those beliefs are going to translate into certain kinds of behaviors. You can rest assured of that. Similarly, if a woman believes that in child rearing, if she believes that discipline is basically cruel and harsh, and therefore her children simply need to be nurtured along, that nurturing alone will do it, and that no limits really need to be placed, well, then certain behaviors are going to occur as a result. What we believe, what attitudes we hold, they influence how we act. And when psychology had a shift from dealing primarily with things that we could not see, inner feelings, inner conflicts, unconscious motives, unconscious desires, unconscious fears and insecurities. When we shifted from that kind of a psychology to a psychology that dealt with behavior, It was a radical approach change for most clinicians. And I have to tell you that my experience has shown me that although there is value, there is great value. I like to say in my book, in my books, both In Sheep's Clothing and In Character Disturbance, I make the distinction, and I've written several articles about this too. I make the distinction between what I call the more neurotic personalities and the more character disturbed personalities. They lie at opposite ends of a continuum. And I make the point that for the more neurotic folks among us, that is, those folks who are so riddled with inner conflict, inner unconscious conflict raging between their basic primal urges and their oppressive superego or conscience. For these folks, the traditional kinds of therapies that we developed, insight-oriented, dynamically oriented psychotherapies that help a person uncover their unconscious or inner conflicts, these approaches are very, very helpful still for individuals who are on the more neurotic end of the spectrum. Here's the problem. Back when those theories were developed, neurosis was relatively, I should qualify that. It was relatively commonplace. Severe neurosis was still rare, but neurosis was relatively commonplace. And there were these bizarre cases where people were really so hung up, so overly wrought with guilt and shame that was completely out of place, and so fraught with worry and so beset by inner conflicts and insecurities and fears that they couldn't pinpoint. And so overcome by their anxiety that they were literally making themselves sick, having all kinds of bizarre physical symptoms that, had their roots basically in intrapsychic pain. Well, for these folks, the talking cure was a godsend. To have them basically spill their guts and find an atmosphere that was warm and accepting, where they could sort through their inner feelings and let their repressed feelings come to the surface. This was just excellent in these times when people were so wrought with fears and insecurities that they were making themselves sick. Well, times have changed. Times have radically changed. We no longer live in the age of don't even think about it. That would be the slogan or the motto that would describe the age, the Victorian era, where these theories got developed. Don't even think about it. People were just too, as we used to say in the 60s, quote, hung up, unquote. They were overly hung up about so many things. These days, instead of having people en masse who are too hung up to function, we have too many people among us who are not hung up enough about the things that they let themselves do. They don't feel badly enough about the things that they let themselves do. They don't hesitate enough. They don't have enough shame. They don't have enough guilt. It's exactly the opposite kind of zeitgeist or cultural atmosphere. Our sociocultural environment is radically different from when our classical theories of psychology were developed. So what we have today, unfortunately, is instead of a fairly prevalent degree of neurosis that is pathological in level, we have an unprecedented level of character disturbance. And by that I mean folks whose very way of seeing things and doing things, who they are as a person, how they mark themselves as a character, their very style of perceiving and relating to the world and to all those in it is the problem. It's not what they feel inside that's tearing them apart. That's the problem, and that they're unaware of. It's how they see things and how they act. That's the problem. And for that, we needed an entirely new paradigm to deal with. So it looks entirely different. It's an entirely different paradigm. So I was giving an interview, giving an interview for somebody who is writing an article that may appear in one of the national magazines very shortly. And we were talking about this whole issue of the spectrum of character disturbance and how important it is to realize how significant our character problems are and what we need to do about them. We're talking about this, and we got into a discussion about some of the candidates in the last Republican debate. Because one candidate seems to pique everybody's interest. I get a lot of inquiries about what I think about Donald Trump. And that's because there are certain features of his personality that are so clearly that are so obvious, and that so clearly red flag certain traits that people have read about. These are more informed days as we live in the information age, and people know signs of narcissism when they see it. They know when somebody has kind of a big head, thinks an awful lot of themselves, and they know that that's one of the features of narcissism. So the question was posed to me, do you think this person has a narcissistic personality disorder? And that got me launched into a whole discussion about the total inadequacy of our current classification system. You know, for a long time, psychiatry was literally at war with the whole notion there was any such thing as a personality disturbance or disorder. And the reason they were at war was because psychiatry is an entirely different line of training than psychology and some of the other mental health fields. It is primarily medicine, and these medical school individuals take some very brief courses in the very rudiments of psychology, just the basics. And then they get out in the field and they do residencies in facilities that primarily operate within the medical model, seeing most things as brain disturbances and biochemical imbalances. And for a long time, the field wanted to simply say that many of the things that we were saying had to do with a person's character, primarily had to do not with character, but with biology. And they did a pretty good job of proving or demonstrating, in some cases, that that was a correct perspective, showing that they could do with medicines what people could not do through other means. But here's the problem. Although it is true that the field erred, we did err. We made a big mistake. We made a big mistake in casting some behaviors and some syndromes as rooted in character that were primarily rooted in abnormal biochemistry. We did make that mistake. But the field kind of threw out the baby with the bathwater, so to speak, and they started to downplay the importance of character. And so now, just about everybody gets some kind of diagnosis who comes for help of some kind. Just about everybody gets some kind of diagnosis, and God help them if they go to their physician or if they go to a psychiatrist, they're likely to get some medicine. And the problem is that when character issues are present, and they so often are, unless they are attended to, and unless they are attended to in the way that character issues must be attended to if they're going to get successfully addressed, well, things don't get any better. Not really. The symptoms might ease. The most distressing symptoms might ease. I'll give you an example. Let's say someone is a real control freak, a power-oriented control freak, prone to losing their temper, and prone to creating all kinds of havoc when they don't get their way. And perhaps they've even gotten to the point of being explosive. Well, there are some medicines that you can give a person that will actually help temper that explosiveness. Sometimes. And actually the medicines that will do that are primarily used to treat other things, such as mood disorders. So many times the person will actually get a diagnosis of having a mood disturbance when the fact is that they've never learned to control their temper, and the other fact is that they happen to be character-wise a controlling type, aggressive individual. But the medicine helps. They're a little bit easier to live with, but the problem still remains. They're still a control freak. They're still overly demanding. They're still overly exacting. They still pitch a fit, just not the same way when they don't get their way. They still, kind of leave no bodies. They leave bodies, in their wake as they're pursuing their goals, trampling over the rights and needs of other people to get what they want. So when the character issues aren't addressed, things don't get any better. And for a long time, those in the helping professionals simply wrote off character issues as untreatable. A lot of people still think that today. I get calls and I get letters and I get contacts through the blog every single week. And people will, my commentators on the blog, by the way, are most of them are some of the most informed people that you'll ever want to come across. But even many of them will sometimes say, I've been told and I believe that there's just no hope. Well, one of the reasons I wrote Character Disturbance two reasons. The first reason is that not everybody has a disturbance of character so great that it rises to the level of disorder. And two, you can deal with character disturbance in therapy, just not traditional therapy. It doesn't work. It was never meant to work. It's not appropriate for that kind of treatment. So I'm talking to this individual about Mr. Trump and his narcissism, which is fairly self-evident. And he asks if I think he has a narcissistic personality disorder. Well, not only is our classification system just really, and I'm talking not so much the international coding system as I'm talking the official diagnostic manual of the American Psychiatric Association. It's gone from bad to worse to worser to worsest, if there is such a thing. It's gotten so nondescript now, that's another program. But to make a long story short, by definition, to have a disorder, your traits of personality have to be such that they cause significant impairments in your ability to function, or they cause you or others significant distress. In other words, you have to be dysfunctional. So, let's take Mr. Trump, for example. By definition, he can't qualify. His style works. And that's the way it is for so many people with disturbances of character, of milder degrees. The style works. You get rewarded for it. Either the style is enabled, in other words, the way the person operates is enabled by those around them, or it's actually rewarded, both behaviorally, sometimes economically. So this ego-driven, grandiose, put everybody else down, build yourself up kind of style works. Not only that, something else works here. And this is a very functional aspect of some narcissism. Some narcissists have such a determination to be quote unquote right that they will do whatever it takes to eventually be right. They'll make mistakes, all right. They won't admit them. They'll make mistakes, and if they're not too pathological, they will admit those mistakes to themselves, even though they won't admit them to anyone else. And when they admit those mistakes to themselves, they will do what they have to do to overcome those mistakes and not make those same mistakes again, because they're determined to win. So the strategy is successful. It works. And so long as it's working, you can't, by definition, by current definition, I'm not saying the definition is right. Matter of fact, I'm not saying that anything within our current classification scheme or diagnostic scheme really works. I think it's become pretty darn dysfunctional. But by definition, there's no way a person like Mr. Trump would warrant that diagnosis. And yet I've heard that bandied about. I've heard it bandied about. So the more important thing that I speak to in character disturbance, and in many articles on the manipulative-people.com blog site, the more important issue is this whole continuum of character pathology that we have going on. and how rampant it is. We live in an age where everyone's character is flawed to some degree. Of course, that's always been the case. What's different about our age is that character dysfunction of some kind, of a degree to cause some significant problems, especially in relationships, significant problems occupationally, socially, in intimate relation, those kinds of problems. We have character issues at the root of today, as opposed to any other label the person's going to get. 9 times out of 10. I have seen those cases. There are those cases, folks. There are cases where someone really has a clinical condition that had absolutely nothing to do with them as a person. Their biochemistry just went kind of haywire. And what they really need is some medical intervention to get back on track, and then they are just fine. But this is rare. This is very rare. Where that's the whole problem. It's very rare where that's the main problem. You know, there are so many individuals willing to attribute behaviors that stem from character deficiencies and severe character maladjustment. There are so many people willing to ascribe the behaviors that result from those things as A, addictions, B, biochemical imbalances, C, mood disturbances, either depression or bipolar illness. There are so many people so willing to slap those labels on problems that at their core are really manifestations of unhealthy character development. That it's really not funny. We've ignored the problem long enough. And even when we finally have to acknowledge it, the unfortunate thing is that not too many people are trained in the kinds of therapies that actually can help. Now, I know that this is a common experience. I hear this all the time. And we've even had some callers to the show in the past that have said this very same thing. We've even had some callers who themselves have struggled with character issues and who knew it and who indicated that they tried to get help in the past and didn't get the kind of help that they needed. And many times were even under the impression that there was no help available. But that's not the case. That's not the case. So I was happy to be a part of the revolution that began when I was in my early training, and that has continued to this day, and continues to be refined. And I'm happy to be a part of it still. And I'm happy to carry the message on this program and on my blog and on my website and in my books. And by the way, I have some big announcement here. In the next few months, I will be making an announcement about 2 more books that will be coming out that are really helpful, practical guides to navigating your way through this sea of character disturbance that we find ourselves in. I can't say any more about it right now, but I'm going to have that information available for you in the coming weeks, as well as information on the workshops coming up next year, and as well as information on some other exciting things that will be happening, including, by the way, let me mention this while I think about it. Next week, I believe, I'm going to have part of the show, a good portion of the show, perhaps the majority of the show, devoted to an interview that I did with Michael Cross, one of the regulars on UCY.tv. And I interviewed Michael about his latest in the series of novels about a character with psychopathic tendencies. And it should be a really interesting. It was a great interview. I've recorded it. It is almost completely edited and will be ready for broadcast next week. So next week we will be live. I will be able to take calls at the beginning and the end of the program, but we also have an interview that I'm going to be playing for you with Michael Cross, so you won't want to miss that next week. Meanwhile, once again, if you want to join the conversation, if you have a question you want to ask me about what we've been talking about today, or you have a comment you want to make, or an example you want to share, or just anything you want to pick my brain about, give us a call at 718-717-8296. That's 718-717-8296. I'm happy to take your call. I'm watching the debates prompted by I'm watching the replay, prompted by the call and interview that I did with this writer for the magazine, and I'll have information about that when and if the article breaks in a national magazine. I'll let you know where you can find it. I may post it on the blog as well. It should be an interesting article. But at any rate, that prompted me to review the recording that I had done of the debate, and it was so interesting to me. Once again, I'm kind of a political junkie. You know, you really can't find a better parade of the various character types than you see within our political arena. And, you know, in large measure, these folks cannot help themselves. They cannot help but betray who they are as individuals, the way they think, the way they act. And in my book, In Sheep's Clothing, I outline several tactics that manipulative people prefer to use. I make the point in the book that it would be almost impossible to list all of the things that manipulative, especially covertly aggressive people can use as weapons in their arsenals to get the better of you, or try and get the better of you. But to make a long story short, just about every tactic that I've written about, the preferred tactics that these folks like to use, was on display during the interview, during the debate. From dodging questions, sidestepping issues, diversion is a great tactic. You know, you get asked a direct question instead of providing a simple, direct answer, which would do just fine. You go someplace else. In one case, one of the debaters decided to just simply not answer the question at all and simply attack the questioner. Now, you could have a debate all day long about whether or not there was some justification for the complaint that the person had. But as anybody who witnessed this interchange saw, The person didn't answer the question, just flat out refused to answer the question, and instead went on the offensive. And this is what manipulative people do. You know, there'd have been plenty of time. There would have been plenty of time to answer the question quickly, succinctly, briefly, directly, and then air your grievance on top of that. Or if you wanted to be sure that you were going to be able to get the grievance in and not be cut off, you could have briefly done that and then answered the question. But no, this person took up the whole time doing something else. This is just a classic manipulative move. And so, you know, you witness these folks, and we have a decision to make. We have a decision to make about who we're going to select to lead us in these very complicated and difficult times. These very, very trying times on so many fronts. On the economic front, it's harder to think of a more trying time. With such massive debt staring us, such massive, massive debt staring us, and most of which, you know, folks like to point the finger at all different places, most of which was just reckless, abandoned, so-called quote-unquote borrowing from money that most of us had paid into the Social Security system, thinking that we were going to actually see the money. But no, the money was stolen. Al Gore is famous for saying that he wanted to put Social Security in a quote-unquote lockbox. And everybody made fun of him for saying that. But to make a long story short, our representatives stole this money to pay for pet projects and other things. And also let folks who are not paying their fair share off the hook. It's gotten pretty ridiculous. It's gotten pretty ridiculous. We are so deeply in debt. The world is a powder keg. It is an absolute powder keg. Radical ideologies of all kinds are running rampant throughout the world. Not just in the Islamic world. Radical ideologies of one type or another still threaten the freedoms of peace-loving folks in many, many places. The world is a powder keg, is a dangerous place, and hearts and minds don't get changed overnight. So this is the kind of world we face. We face huge divisions at home, a crumbling infrastructure, a crumbling societal structure, all the pillars, all the traditional pillars of solid character formation, all crumbling. Marriage, family, community, all crumbling. Take a look at certain parts of Chicago. You'd be hard-pressed to call it anything but a war zone instead of a community. And yes, the fingers start pointing all different directions. But I've heard the excuses, and I've looked at this situation very seriously and for a long time. To blame the situation on drugs without looking at the underpinnings of why people do them or deal them, to blame it on poverty without looking at the fact that we have had poor people come to this country, poor people who exist in this country still, people who work 2 and 3 jobs and barely earn a living wage and who still don't blow their neighbors away and still do their best to raise a family and still do their best to be faithful partners? It does a disservice to all of these folks to blame the things that we have traditionally blamed for this character problem. We have a character problem second to none. And we have a bunch of buffoons to choose from to lead us. When I think about it, even for a minute, I get pretty depressed. And of the folks who I believe are fairly solid in character, there are a couple. There are actually a couple in the race that I think are actually, character-wise, very solid, principled folks. But then again, I don't agree with their principles. But at least they have them. At least they have integrity. At least they are decent, well-meaning people. Instead of charlatans, manipulators, power-hungry despots. It's a little depressing, I got to tell you. And if we don't get a handle on what our real problem is, and soon, I fear for what's going to happen. I've said this before, and I'll say it again. I've said it many times. We face two great enemies. One is without, from without, and that is the radical ideology that seeks to dominate and to annihilate all those who don't march in lockstep. We've seen these kind of ideologies before. Fascism is nothing new. Totalitarianism is nothing new. Extremism is nothing new. We've been here before. Been there, done that. Folks who believe that it's their way or the highway. That everyone else submits and they live. If they don't, they die. That everyone agrees with their way of thinking, adopts their belief system. You do, you live. You don't, you die. We've been there before. This is nothing new. But this is the great enemy from without that we face. And it's substantial. This is a worldwide, serious issue. This ideology is dead serious. And it threatens everyone. So that's the terror that we face from without. The one that we face from within has to do with our own crazy ideologies. The twisted ways in which so many of us think. The character crisis that is destroying our relationships, our marriages, our families, our communities, and by extension, our country. These are the two great things we face. So if ever there was a time that we need a leader of real sound character, it's now. Now the problem is, where are you going to find one? We've had an endless parade of folks all vying for the job. I'm hard-pressed to find a really decent character among them. There are a few. Like I said, there are a few. But even with those few, when I look real carefully at their policies and at their philosophy and the principles that they espouse, I just shake my head and I'm thinking, oh my, we're in for some rough time. That's why you hear the song play at the beginning of the program and at the end of the program. Here we are talking about character and what plays as a patriotic piece. Well, the connection is just as I have said many, many, many times. Freedom depends on character to survive. You can't have one without the other. And the thing that has made this country great over our history is freedom. Working together with character. Decent people with a solid internal moral compass, left alone, unimpeded, unhampered, unshackled by a repressive government, not hamstrung in any way, decent, caring, loving, hardworking, dedicated, honest, faithful people build things. They build great lives for themselves. They build opportunities for others. They build sound communities. And they build a great country. That's where it's all at. Everything hinges on that. So that's why you hear what you do at the beginning of the program and at the close of the program. This was a great, great experiment in freedom. And we have had shining moments where our national character was of a nature that allowed us to really prosper, to be the envy of the world. And we can be again. But we have to stare this demon in the eye. We have to call it out. We have to call out the elephant in the room, recognize it for what it is, and deal with it head on. We face two great threats to our freedom. The threat from without, with these radical ideologies that want everyone else at their feet, believing the way they do, and this threat from within, this character decline that is crumbling our institutions, our marriages, our families, and our communities. We have to do something about it, and it starts one heart at a time. And that's why I do this program, and that's why I write my books, and that's why I write the articles I do on my blogs. And that's why I invite you to tune in again next week when we'll be discussing these matters. And I'll also have my interview with Michael Cross as a good part of the program. You won't want to miss that. And so until then, as we play once again the theme, remember this interconnection between freedom and character. It's the most important thing I want to get across to you. We all have a duty to preserve our freedom.